So by all means, give me a quick hello. Tell me where you're from. Let's see who's out there. Okay, India is our first location. Hello. Ohio, excellent. We have Argentina, more from India, more from India. It's very popular, excellent. Loads from India. Saudi Arabia, Kenya, fantastic, excellent. Well, I hope it's as sunny where you are as it is here. It's a chilly but lovely day in Cambridge. Today I'm going to be talking about Group 3 integration. It's going to be a webinar that's very similar to the ones that you may have seen already. I've given 2 integration webinars for Group 1, for Group 2. This one's slightly more complicated because obviously when we are looking at Group 3 individuals and societies, we're looking at quite a few different subjects. So the point of these integration webinars is to provide you with specific advice and tips that can be applied quite easily and clearly to the subjects. So I'm going to be generalizing a little bit more today because we're looking at history, we're looking at geography, economics, anthropology, world religions, global politics, etc., etc. So it's a little bit harder to go into depth. So I will try and give some examples of how to integrate TOK with each of these DP subjects. So if you are an economics teacher and you're looking for loads and loads of information, I'm only going to be able to give you 1 or 2 pieces of advice, but hopefully I'll be giving you some principles that you can apply across the board. Obviously, if you have any questions, because I've got loads and loads of material to help all of these subjects, then please write to me afterwards, or you can send me a short little message at the end of this webinar. Someone's having problems with your audio. I'm sorry about that, but I should remind everyone that I will be sending out a recording of this, so don't worry if you have any technological problems, or if you join us late, or if you have to go. You will all be sent a video of this, so you can check later if you missed anything. Let me just run quickly through what we're going to be looking at today. So the idea is that this is not really for TOK teachers. I would love to have people out there that aren't TOK specialists. I'd love to have just ordinary Group 3 teachers. I know that TOK integrates fantastically well with Group 3. So I, for some reason, always seem to end up teaching alongside Group 3 teachers. So a lot of you probably have got experience with TOK, but this is really aimed at people who are looking for more advice, more help on not just how to bring TOK into their classrooms, but also what TOK is in the first place. So the second part of this webinar will just give a quick introduction to what the course is, what we try and do on the course. I'll have a quick consideration of this problem of integration, which is essential if we are going to properly deliver the DP, but which is difficult to do. So I'll just quickly run through how I see this as a problem, how other people see it as a problem. Then we'll try and solve that problem. I'm going to show you some I hope specific, or as specific as I can make them, ways to integrate Group 3 with TOK. I'm going to focus on 3 things: the new 12 concepts of TOK that have been introduced for the new syllabus that we've just started teaching. I'm going to think about some key thinkers that you can draw on, the kind of people that work for both TOK and Group 3 subjects. And then I'm going to have a look at some real life situations, the kind of things that would work really well in TOK, but would also work well in history, in geography, in the Group 3 subjects. And then I'd like to just talk quickly about how we frame our discussions in TOK. I mean, as I will say, any discussion is great, but if we can try and do it in a TOK-oriented way, that would be helpful for us. Then at the end, I'll briefly just outline some of the support that theoryofknowledge.net gives to this aspect of delivering the DP. Yeah, as I've said before, not the best timing at the moment for school visits, but I'll just quickly outline how I work with schools directly and the kind of support that we can give for this question and for other questions associated with TOK. Okay, so just a quick introduction. The webinar should last about an hour, so we should be over by about 12 o'clock. I am Michael Dunn. I'm the creator of theoryofknowledge.net, which I set up about 10 years ago. It's been going all that time. I've made quite a lot of changes to the site. I'm about to introduce the biggest changes that I've yet introduced. There's going to be a whole new website being launched. Should have happened already, but should be within a week or so. I've got loads of new resources that I'm about to launch, so I'm quite excited about this next year. And I'm also really enjoying working with the new TOK syllabus, which I think is, well, it's got its problems, but I think overall it's definitely an improvement to the way in which we teach this subject. Questions and messages. As I'm speaking, I'm sure you'll have questions about the kind of thing that I'm talking about, and maybe want sort of other examples and other tips and things like that. You can either send me an email afterwards, which I'll respond to, and I will send out all of my responses to the sort of FAQs that I get from all of you guys. I might have time just to have a look at a few questions that you post to the chat. I think that works quite well, so we'll see if we have time to do that. But I'll be sending out a debrief email, which will include the recording, this presentation that you can use yourself, and also all of those FAQs that will be asked. And I will try and send that out early next week. Okay, so a very quick introduction to TOK if you are just a Group 3 teacher and you're not a specialist in TOK. It's first of all meant to last 100 hours. I personally try and cram in much more than that via various devious kind of ways. I mean, I've been the head of Form 6 DP2, so I give them loads more TOK than probably they get in other schools. I don't overload them with homework, but I try and find time during lunchtime sometimes to give extra sessions, and I try and get in at least 100 hours. You could teach 1,000 hours of TOK. It's such a wonderful, rich course. The basic purpose of TOK is to ask students where we get our knowledge from and what we do with it. Okay, so the big question is, well, how do you know, or how do you know what you know? And it's an intriguing question that they find confusing at the start, but they very quickly find their feet with it, and they realize what an important question it is to ask. Excuse me. The course is now assessed via an essay. That's 2/3 of the final mark. And a new thing for the 2022 syllabus, which is an exhibition, which is 1/3 of the mark. Exhibition is done at the end of the first year of the DP, and the essay is done at the beginning of the second year. So no exam, which for me, and I know for a lot of TOK teachers, makes it a fantastic course to teach, because you're not going through it in a sort of tick box kind of mentality. You don't have to cram before exams, which I always find a rather an anticlimax to the end of a wonderful course. So I like the way it's assessed. The other purpose of TOK is to try and bring all of the aspects of the DP together. We are getting students to think critically about all of the courses that they do. And this is where the concept of integration comes in. You know, how do we do that? How do we make sure that we're all on the same page? How do we ensure that the ideas that we are teaching them in TOK classes get through to them in their subject classes, and vice versa? How do we draw on what they are doing in English, in science, in visual arts, whatever it is that they're doing? You know, how do we get that kind of dialogue going, that sort of that mutual relationship? Another thing here that I think is worth saying, I mean, we've seen a lot of people talking about the so-called 4 C's. They've been around for a little while now, but I think they are as relevant as ever. These are the skills that business leaders, educational leaders, politicians, lots of important people, some of who know a little bit about education, what they think students should be learning at school and at university. Critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. And I try to align my TOK course, the way I teach it, as much as I can to those 4 skills, because I think they are essential. I think they provide us with a really clear set of aims to instill in our students. Critical thinking, clearly, it's obvious why TOK aligns to that. Communication, because, without the ability to express your ideas, articulate your understanding of things, there's not much point having the understanding. Collaboration, education now, I love the way we've shifted from those awful kind of lines of desks that I was taught in to kind of round tables and discussion between people, because collaboration is what we do in the real world. And creativity, coming up with new ideas, but also understanding that there are different ways of approaching knowledge, different ways of creating ideas. So I think all of those align fantastically well with TOK, and I think those are a great way of understanding what the purpose of TOK is. Here's a diagram that we created just to show the different aspects of the course. I won't read through every single one, but basically there are sort of, well, 3 elements. Core theme is kind of us as knowers in the middle, knowledge and the knower. So that sort of feeds into both the areas of knowledge and the optional themes. The areas of knowledge are the aspects that students should have an understanding of all of those 5 areas of knowledge. They are kind of like the way in which we categorize knowledge, the way in which we organize our ideas, our concepts, and so on. And the optional themes, of which students are supposed to develop a deep knowledge of 2. I actually, excuse me, I think that you probably are going to mention all of those during a TOK course. I think it's virtually impossible to not mention all of them at least one point during the course. And personally, I would definitely draw on multiple ones there. You can see how closely they align to Group 3 subjects, politics, religion, also, indigenous societies, I think, comes up a lot in anthropology, but it's not the same as anthropology. That's quite important. Anthropology would be more to do with human sciences. Indigenous societies, we are trying to understand it from the perspective of indigenous societies rather than from an outsider's point of view. So these are I think the best way of understanding it are our personal and societal affiliations, things that we kind of belong to and which shapes the way we understand the world. And all of them affect the way we understand the world in different ways, which I'll try and come back to a little bit throughout the webinar. Okay, so there is a problem. Maybe problem is the wrong word. Maybe it's a challenge, because I think it's something that can be surmounted. We are always faced with this task when we begin delivering the DP to a new set of students. How do we bring everything together? Because this is one of the ways in which I think the DP is head and shoulders above other programs for students of this age. It is designed to be integrated, to interlink all the aspects, interlink, rather than looking at, say, 3 separate courses that don't touch on each other. So what form should it take? How should it be done? What role should TOK coordinators have? What role should the DP coordinator play? Who should be in charge of this? How should ordinary DP teachers, what should they be doing? And I think these are really, really hard questions to answer. And obviously each school will have its own solutions to that, or its own expectations of that. But I think at the heart of it, what we need is to set up a course in TOK that allows all the teachers to be able to contribute as often as possible, if not all of the time. Okay, so what do I mean by that? I think the way in which we have taught TOK in the past, the way I've taught it in the past, is by, if we just go back to those different elements of TOK, we spend, say, 3 or 4 weeks looking at the arts. We spend 3 or 4 weeks looking at history. We then maybe spend 3 or 4 weeks looking at language. And that's okay. You can make the links whilst you're doing that. But what that does is it shuts out the majority of DP teachers. Whilst we're doing history, it's going to be quite hard to bring in a maths teacher to talk about, his experiences of TOK. How do we enable a sports science teacher to help us when we are looking at the arts. So I think that traditional way of delivering the course is not particularly helpful for integrating the course, because during those times we can't draw on the expertise of those subject teachers. So in 2017, I think it was a few years ago, working with some colleagues at a school in Peru where I was teaching. I've just finished teaching there, Newton College. I structured my course into questions. I backward planned from the essay titles that are given out every year. And I came up with some big questions. Initially, we started with 8 big questions. I've now streamlined it down to 6 big questions. And these big questions can be answered by any teacher at any point during the course. So I'll show you what those big questions look like. So we start with foundations. What is theory of knowledge? Why do we study it? We look at values, we look at communication, we look at perspectives. I mean, you can read it there. I don't need to read them all out. Now those are the questions that we look at in TOK, but those questions can be transformed into questions specific to every single DP subject. So this is a webinar about Group 3 subjects. I am a former history teacher, so I'll probably mention history too often. I do love history. So if we're looking at history, those big questions become these questions. Okay, so what is theory of knowledge? Why do we study it? Becomes what is history and why do we study it? You can see the fairly simple principle that we apply there. So each of those questions, at any point in the course, the history teacher or the history department can help us to understand those questions, which means that integration suddenly becomes a lot easier. So that is kind of like the first point of the way in which I think that TOK can be integrated. I mean, these are my big questions. I'm sure you could come up with other questions to structure your course that could be answered by subject teachers in your school. But that's the way I have been doing it, and this has worked very, very well for me in the schools that I've been working. Okay, so that's kind of like the fundamentals. That's the sort of course design that I advocate to help us integrate this program. Now I'm going to try and give you some more specific ways of integrating. My title is wrong there. You can see instantly. It should say specific ways to integrate Group 3 with TOK. I'm sorry about that. So drawing on TOK, first of all, why do we do it? Well, it helps us to, it gives students a greater experience. It's a much richer experience. It's more fun. You can get them arguing, you can get them debating. You can get them interacting with their subject more because, they start questioning the opinions of the economic thinker. They start questioning the sources that they are given in history. They start asking whether or not that anthropological method was an effective way of gathering data, etc., etc. I also think that drawing on TOK allows us to tap into what I've already mentioned, the 4 C's. Obviously, critical thinking. Obviously, communicating those ideas, creativity, showing them that there are so many different ways, so many original ways of creating knowledge, and often the more original it is, the better. And collaboration, working together to solve these problems and to understand the nature of their subjects. Okay, but that's all kind of a little bit vague, perhaps. I'll try and give some slightly more specific examples of how this can work. So this is a new aspect of the course that I find very, very helpful. Actually, I wondered what the purpose was when I first saw it, but the IB have identified 12 key concepts that students should have a good understanding of, and it's quite a useful sort of lexicon of ideas that they can mention and discuss in their 2 assessment tasks in TOK, but they are also words and ideas that they can use in the rest of their DP. So all of these words are relevant to some degree to all of the DP subjects. Obviously, some of them have extra resonance, I think, in certain subjects, but they can all be discussed and considered in the different DP subjects, particularly I think group 3. I think group 3 works. There's very little effort in seeing how TOK aligns with the group 3 subjects. I think, you know, before I became a TOK teacher, I was a history teacher. And I realized when I began teaching TOK, wow, I have always been teaching this. I just didn't make it explicit. So I think Group 3 and TOK have a really, really nice relationship, a very, very close relationship. So these are the 12 concepts, and I'd like to just focus on a few of them and show how they could align with certain subjects within Group 3. So, I mean, I like to draw on quotations. I think they're a great starting point. I think they're dangerous, perhaps, because sometimes students feel that they can, you know, prove their argument by just writing down a quote. There you go. I've now proven my argument. No, you've got to go a little bit further than that. You've got to give your thoughts on that. You've got to. I suggest to my students they use them as a starting point rather than an end point. And I also encourage them not to replace their own ideas with quotes. So, you know, the idea is that they're a great way of starting a discussion, starting a sort of idea, a thread in an essay or in their exhibition. So you can probably figure out which of the subjects these kind of align to. So we begin with this very, very famous quote by Winston Churchill, one of the most quoted people in history. So history is written by the victors. He also wrote, he also said, history will be kind to me for I intend to write it. And he did go ahead and write it. He's one of the few world leaders who won the Nobel Prize for literature for his history of well, the English-speaking people and also the World War II. So this really takes us very close to power. Actually, I run a couple of lessons to do with this quote, and I actually end up with my students concluding that it's inaccurate because history is not always written by the victors, and actually the victor is quite a difficult concept to identify because we end up concluding that the battle itself, the conflict itself, doesn't end when the fighting stops. It actually, that's almost like a starting point. Then the struggle begins to write the history. And often it is the defeated side that ends up writing more powerful history than the so-called victors. So in other words, you know, it's a great, very pithy comment by Winston Churchill. He was very good at those, but it's not necessarily true. And it's a great starting point to explore the idea of power. You know, who has power? How does that relate to the writing of history and our understanding of history? So many of the Group 3 subjects, you know, we compare them alongside the Group 4 subjects, you know, social sciences versus experimental sciences. Which one has more evidence? Which one is more objective? Which one is the true science? This applies, I think, to politics. It applies to psychology. It applies to any of these subjects that have a methodology, but which perhaps don't have the level of objectivity that the natural sciences do. So certainty is a really interesting concept to look at in Group 3. Here's what Jean-Paul Sartre said about politics. Politics is a science. You can demonstrate that you are right and others are wrong. Is that valid? A great sort of starting point. And you know, obviously has a lot of resonance at the moment with the US elections coming up. Truth, well, truth, obviously a keyword for us in TOK, a keyword for us in all of the DP. There's a nice quote by Benjamin Disraeli, where knowledge ends, religion begins. You know, would lead on to some nice discussions about what truth is, whether truth is possible, what sort of methods we use in order to discern what the truth is. Psychology there related to values and history as well. Psychology keeps trying to vindicate human nature. History keeps undermining the effort, which is a lovely quote. I mean, students can first of all give their own interpretation of what that means, and then whether or not they agree with it. Margaret Mead, probably the most famous anthropologist of all time, And her quote there, which I think aligns really nicely to responsibility: "I was brought up to believe that the only thing worth doing was to add to the sum of accurate information in the world." So obviously that applies to anthropology, but I think it applies to all of the group 3 subjects. Are we doing them in order to improve the world, or are we doing them just to understand more? Or are those two things, do those two things overlap? By understanding more, do we make the world a better place? I think often that's not the case, because I think often knowledge is misused deliberately. So some great quotes there to begin some great discussions that relate to the group 3 subjects. I will quickly go over the resources that we offer in theoryofknowledge.net for this, but for all of the group 3 subjects, I have tons and tons of quotes like this, aligning to the 12 key concepts. So I think this is a really, really great way of drawing on TOK in the different subjects, and also encouraging some really important discussion about these terms that work really, really well. Okay, so that's the first specific way in which I think integration can happen. I think there are many, I mean, obviously many thinkers that work really, really well in group 3 subjects and in TOK. I've given just 4 examples. You know, this is what I meant when I said it's harder for me in this webinar to be specific. But you know, again, I've got lists and lists of key thinkers for each of the subjects who work really well for us in TOK. So here, I've actually picked these out from TED. Again, I've got an actually brand new TED resource. I've got about 100 TED talks that I've unpacked, linked to the DP subjects, linked to aspects of TOK, and I've kind of just added them again to the site because they weren't very accessible. Now they're really accessible. Here are 4 that work really, really well. So Sam Richards is a sociologist, and this is a really, really provocative, I suppose is the word, a provocative TED talk, and it will make quite a lot of students really uncomfortable, but it really tries to make you realize the power of empathy. So I won't give too much away. It is the link there will take you to the TED talk. It is a phenomenal talk, and I hope. Well, I think it's one of the best talks I've ever seen about sort of putting yourself in someone else's shoes, and you know, uncomfortably so. You know, you're forced to get inside another person's shoes. So it's worth having a look at. So he's a great thinker. Hans Rosling very sadly died recently. I've never seen statistics presented in such a way as he did it. They became interesting, and I'm, you know, not a huge sort of mathematical thinker or scientific thinker. I'm statistics and things scare me a little bit, but his way of presenting statistics was incredible. He gave a couple of talks for TED, and he's worth checking out. So his ideas align really, really nicely with geography, with politics, with a lot of the group 3 subjects, and the key to understanding, or the key to seeing what he gives us, is to ask students and ask yourselves, what is your intuitive knowledge of this issue? You know, be it migration, be it education, be it population growth, development, etc. And then he gives you the statistics, and it contradicts all of our feelings about what is happening in the world, where we are heading in the world. It actually it's quite optimistic on many levels. Whether or not that could in itself be an interesting topic of conversation. Should we be optimistic? Is that a good mind frame for developing objective knowledge about the world? But obviously, being statistics and used in a responsible way, this is quite objective knowledge that he presents us with. So that's a great talk to look at. All of the things that he's done are great. We've got an absolutely fantastic talk from Tai Selassie, who right now I'm in Cambridge, and all of the students are coming back, and it takes me back to the time when I was at university. And every single person, when you met people at university, asked the same question: where are you from? Where are you from? Where are you from? And I try to give my students, I try to give them this talk. I mean, I hope it doesn't get them into too much trouble, but I say this just completely rips the carpet from under people's feet who ask you that question: where are you from? Tell them it's a stupid question. Tell them that the question should be, where do you feel local? And I think her talk is one of the best things I've ever seen on TED. It's absolutely brilliant for group 3. It deals with identity, it deals with internationalism. It's a fantastic talk. And she's an absolutely brilliant speaker. So that's a really good one to look at. This one is one of the final talk there, Leslie Hazelton. She's an amazing person, an agnostic Jew, I think she describes herself, who has an expertise in Islam. So she's got a fascinating combination of kind of religious perspectives. She writes a lot about the Quran and Muhammad. And this speech, all about the role of doubt in religious faith, will completely change the way you view religion. She is an incredible human being, an incredible talker. In my course, in my version of TOK, our final question is experts. What does it take to become a discerning knower? And I think doubt is essential to being a discerning knower. You have to not be 100% sure about things, and often we regard religious thinkers as being 100% certain, and she shows us that's not a valid way of viewing religious thinkers. There's doubt in everything we do, and that is, well, you can watch it for yourself. It's an amazing talk, and it will really rethink or make students rethink religion, I think, the nature of religion. Okay, so those are just 4 examples of great thinkers. These are people that work brilliantly in TOK. They work brilliantly in various different DP subjects. So, focus on these people, these kind of people, to bridge the gap between what we do in TOK and what other teachers do in their own DP subjects. Okay, so key to theory of knowledge, and something that I personally really like, is the fact that our evidence for our knowledge claims should come from real life situations. Okay, so I remember studying philosophy at university for a year and being incredibly frustrated that everything was proven with hypothetical examples, and you can make hypothetical examples up. And often students will do that themselves. They'll come up with a hypothetical example to prove a point. And we don't really accept that in TOK. We think that evidence should come from what's actually going on in the world. Even if something sounds viable and realistic, did it actually happen? Can you tell me where it happened? When did it happen? Who did it happen to? And if students can't do that, then it's not really very good evidence. And I really like that personally. I think it makes the course really applicable to the real world. And useful, and I think students appreciate it. They come to appreciate it because it makes them realize that this is not just a sort of abstract conceptual course. It's actually very much grounded in what's going on in the world. So I have a huge emphasis on real life situations. Real life situations can be news events, they can be issues, big sort of global issues. They can be the experiences of students. They can be at any level. They can be at sort of local level, personal level, local level, regional level, global level, any level at all. So anything that is real, anything that's going on in the world, anything that prompts us to ask questions about how we develop an understanding of the world. So obviously you'll instantly realize that this is again where group 3 subjects are fantastic for us, because obviously group 3 subjects are about the world, individuals and societies. We are very much focused on the real world. So this is a really great way for us to integrate these 2 aspects of the DP. So let me give you some examples. So every month I publish a newsletter. So I send out 20 real life situations that I give suggestions on how to unpack. I sort of pose questions that students can then consider themselves. So here are a few of the recent ones that that I've found and I've looked at, I've actually only linked the first one to subjects. I will update this presentation before I send it out. So this is a great article about field work, which is a moot point at the moment, I suppose. But it argues that first-hand fieldwork, actually getting into the natural world, is essential if we are going to develop a proper understanding of it. So this applies to geography. This applies to ESS if you've got that in Group 3. You've got to get out there and see it for yourself. First-hand knowledge, empirical knowledge, is essential for our understanding of the world. So that's a great discussion point for us in TOK. Is it only knowledge when you can see it, when you can experience it, or can you read about it? And I think that's a really good question, not just in geography, but in lots of aspects of Group 3 subjects. Anthropology as well, I think, could definitely sort of consider that. There's the second article there. I mean, we are always seeing these reports on happiness, the level of happiness in different countries. And this is, we're not so much interested in which countries are happiest. We're more interested in how did they gather their data? How can you possibly say which countries are the happiest? How do you evaluate that? This is a qualitative judgment rather than a quantitative judgment. Can you actually say this? So it's a great. I mean, obviously it's important to understand this kind of thing, but can you actually do it? Can you actually do it meaningfully? So this would apply to a lot of different Group 3 subjects. Politics, again, geography. We can even apply it to history. There are other reports about happiness in history. I think recently they've said that we're at a very low level of happiness. Well, can we actually say that? So I think that's a nice little article there that you can have a look at. There are loads of articles like that. Every year they publish new studies into happiness and emotional well-being and so forth. Okay, so very, very kind of topical to what is going on at the moment. The way in which people have been impacted by what's going on is making a lot of people reevaluate, perhaps it's fair to say, slightly self-indulgent views about knowledge in the world and science. And in this time of emergency, a lot of us are now, looking to science as the thing that is going to save us. Even people who previously perhaps would have mistrusted it. We are waiting desperately for this vaccine, and we are realizing, these kind of times make us realize that science, when it is applied, works. It's as simple as that. So this is an article. I mean, I know there are a lot of articles arguing to the contrary, and we're seeing a lot of these protests by people who don't want to wear masks for various reasons. But I think for the most part, that's catching the headlines. But for the most part, more people now are kind of they're embracing evidence-based beliefs, and this is an article that considers that. So this would apply very nicely to a lot of Group 3 subjects. History, I mean, I've just admitted I have a kind of natural bias to history. I'm also a film fan, so this question always really intrigues me. To what extent can we draw on movies to understand the past? So this is all about the film 1917, but I've got similar articles looking at other films. Can we use them as a serious historical source? And on the one hand, they give us a really good idea of the emotions that went on during these events. On the other hand, they are obviously designed for entertainment. There's the film Dunkirk, which I saw recently. Both these films are absolutely extraordinary. But can we actually use them to base our understanding of the past? Can we avoid using them is another question, because they inevitably seep into our kind of psyches. Most of us view or conceive of World War I and World War II via movies that we have seen or books that we have read. Is that valid? Can we escape it? So that's one of many articles like that. So those are the kind of things that work for us in TOK, and that would, I think, work quite nicely in Group 3 subjects, and hopefully give students a really nice, engaging, fun sort of starting point to consider some serious kind of concepts and ideas. So those are three specific ways in which I think we can integrate these two aspects of the DP. I want to talk a little bit about how we discuss things in TOK. Now, as I've said, any discussion is great. You know, if you're getting your students engaged, if you're getting them talking, if you're getting them offering their opinions, you're doing what we should do, right? I think that's pretty much what we need to do. Just get them talking, get them offering their ideas, listen to them. They like to be listened to. And I love it when I set up a discussion and it just kind of takes on a life of its own, and I just sit there smiling, listening to all these people talking, arguing sometimes, and that's why we do what we do. I think at least that's why I do what I do. I just love that sort of part of lessons. So any kind of discussion, any kind of talk is good, I think. But in TOK we do try to direct our discussion and our thinking into what we call knowledge questions. And there are basically two types of knowledge questions. There's first order knowledge, which is about the world directly, and is sort of what we do in our DP subjects. So, you know, if we're thinking about history, you know, this is a cliched example that I use all the time, but, you know, why did the First World War start would be a first order knowledge question. But we are more interested in second order knowledge, and that is how we know, okay? That is how knowledge is used. That is about the nature of the knowledge claims that we are making. So, you know, applying that to the question that I just gave, you might ask the question, why do historians have different opinions about why the First World War started? So we are more interested in the second type of question. Okay, so that I know is tricky. It's tricky for the students, and it's tricky also for DP teachers, because it does take a while to perfect an understanding of first and second order knowledge, and sometimes the line between them is really unclear. So I know this is kind of a big ask to get teachers to develop an understanding of second order knowledge, but that is what we try to do in TOK. And the moment that students have developed an understanding and can distinguish between these two types of knowledge, it's the moment they've got the course. So let me try and give a bit more context there. So here are three real life situations. Again, these are media sources that I have used, and I'll try and talk about the first order knowledge there, and then sort of how that differs from the second order knowledge. So this is an article that I read recently about the Archbishop of Canterbury, who, if you're not familiar, is the kind of highest person in the Church of England. And this is quite a controversial statement that he made. He said that our representation of Jesus shouldn't always be white. And there is a little picture of Jesus, very, very familiar to most of us. He normally looks like that, right? He looks like Robert Shaw in Jesus Christ Superstar, very, very white, you know, sort of nicely trimmed beard. So I suppose the first order knowledge there would be, how is God represented in different religions around the world, which is a very interesting question. You know, you've got some religions where they don't have any human representation of God. You have some religions where we make them as human as possible. So that's quite an interesting question. But that's first order. We're not really interested in that. The question that we might ask would be something like, to what extent is our representation of God based on our own identities? You know, to what extent do our own egos determine the representation of God, etc., etc. So that I think is a fascinating question. You know, it's a really good one, probably quite controversial, could get some interesting discussions going there. So here's a second question. We're going back to Margaret Mead. Again, if you don't know much about her, she was an anthropologist who worked in the Pacific, looked at lots of islands in the Pacific, Tahiti and all those kind of places, and she fell in love with their culture, and sort of was quite was very complimentary about their culture and compared it very favorably to Western culture. And this rubbed a lot of people up in the wrong way. So sort of first order knowledge question would be, what were her representations of, um, of Polynesia? But the second order knowledge there would be related to why we feel attacked when other cultures are compared more favorably to our own. This also links to the idea of how knowledge changes over time. This also relates to the way in which academics also often try and undermine each other in order to get their own opinions across. So there's loads of interesting stuff going on, I think, in that article. And yeah, she's a fascinating character as well, in her own right. This final story, again, linked to history. I think this is a really good story. So this was I think that the title of the book was I think it's something like My First Time. It's got quite a controversial title. I can't remember it now. Actually, we can click on this, can't we? So yeah, there we go. Yeah, you never forget your first time. There we go. I'll go back to this. It's a great title, and it's been written by this historian, a female historian, who says that. Sorry, I'm just going all over the place right now. Who says that George Washington has always been written about by men in a very kind of male way. And this gives a very warped understanding of who he was, what his legacy was. Everything is evaluated through this male sort of dominated kind of point of view. So she has written a book which tries to be a lot more objective, one of the first biographies of Washington written by a woman. And she tries not to take that approach at all. And so she's come up with quite a different account of his life and the work he did. So, again, first order knowledge would be something like, how successful was George Washington? What were the key achievements of George Washington, et cetera, et cetera. For us in TOK, it would be, how do our perspectives determine our understanding of history? Or, to what extent is our understanding of the past dominated by our gender perspective? Or, you can make it a little bit more specific. So that's the kind of thing that we'd be looking at in that question. So that's a really fun article to read. Okay, so that's what we mean by framing our discussions, framing our exploration. That's the difference between what we kind of do in TOK and what ordinary DP teachers do. All right, so that's kind of it. I mean, that seems quite brief. I'm very happily take questions about what I've discussed. I've got loads more suggestions, loads more tools. So the thing that I have designed and which is available to all the members of my website is what I call the DP integration tool. So it gives a folder for every DP subject except business and management, which I was reminded about recently by someone. It gives a folder for all of the DP subjects, obviously all of the group 3 subjects, and it gives you a whole list of ways in which you can integrate the key concepts. It gives loads and loads of media sources, so you can look at real life situations. Lots and lots of TED Talks. It gives a bit of an explanation and an introduction again to TOK. So there's loads of help for every single teacher. You just enter your folder and you've got sort of several documents, I think 6 or 7 documents, which will help you draw on the ideas of TOK. And the idea is you do it to the extent that you want to. There's a banner there with the big questions, which you can just stick on your wall. But you can go a lot further than that, and you can draw on the TED Talks, and you can draw on the media sources, and you can take it to whatever level you feel comfortable with. So that's the idea behind that. As I also mentioned, I publish a TOK newsletter every month, which I think is still the only one of its kind out there. But it gives you 20 media stories, links them to different parts of TOK, gives you a brief outline of the story, and then gives quite a long list of suggestions for how you can explore it, ask questions about it, use it in your classroom. And there's also a huge resource that I've also released called the Knowledge Lexicon, which has about 1,000 different terms, ideas, really key words, really important words for students to draw on. and links them to, again, to the media sources that I've used. So I've got quite a lot of support on the site for non-TOK teachers. I would love more non-TOK teachers to be using it. I don't just want it to be for TOK. We are all TOK teachers, so that's the idea sort of driving the site at the moment. I also visit a lot of schools, or at least I did before there was a worldwide pandemic. I've been to lots and lots of fantastic places and amazing schools. This picture here, I think, is in Doha, where I spoke to quite a few different schools, and that was a really great workshop. So I like to speak to TOK teachers. I like to speak to non-TOK teachers. I really like to speak to students. So I think the two words that I would say that summarize my approach is passion and purpose. I want to make students passionate about this amazing course because I love it so much, and I want them also to realize the purpose behind it, because there's no point really being involved in it unless you know why you're doing it, and that's kind of the first thing that I try and establish with my own students, so they know why they're doing it, they know it's great, and that helps to instill some passion for this subject. Okay, so that's kind of it. I will make sure that this actually this presentation should be updated a little bit. You can join us by heading over to the membership if you're not already a member, so you can have a look at this in your own time. I won't go on and on and on. Okay, so I would be happy. I have a little bit of time left, got 10 minutes or so. I'm happy to take a few questions. So if you have any questions, I will try to answer them. So there's a Q&A section and there's the chat section. So in the Q&A, why don't you have a business subject integration? Because I have not got that far. I apologize for not having a business integration yet. I am working on it. It's one of many things that I'm working on. I will try and release it. I think I promised people by the end of September, but it's now October. So we'll try and get it out by the end of October. I think in the meantime, you can draw on a lot of the resources that I have provided for economics, and many other aspects of Group 3 I think are relevant for business management. So you can use those in the meantime. Someone said, is there an advantage to doing the exhibition a bit later in the course when the students have had? Yeah, so this is more of a question from a TOK teacher. When should we do the exhibition? The IB say it should be done at the end of year 1, but there is an advantage waiting until year 2. I personally think the priority should be the sort of mental health of the students, and I think leaving everything for DP2 puts too much pressure on them. What I have done this year, I mean, it's all a bit complicated this year. I mean, I know it's the presentation still, but what I did was I made them create everything for their presentation for the end of DP1, but they didn't deliver it until DP2, and actually that worked quite well. So I suppose it's conceivable that you could do all of your preparation for the exhibition and then maybe have your exhibition day in DP2, maybe. That would be one way of doing it. But I do think that you should get as much of it out of the way as possible by the end of DP1. Okay, sorry, I'm just reading another question which I'm not quite sure of. To what extent are we the same? The lines of integrating TOK become blurred. I need a bit more time to think about that. But I don't think that's a problem where there are blurred lines between TOK and other subjects. I mean, I think that just sort of indicates how relevant and how applicable TOK is to other subjects. But I'll try and give a fuller answer to that in my debrief. Any other questions? Lots of hellos from people, which is nice. If you have any other questions, some people have to go to class. Okay, enjoy your class. All right, so I'm not getting any other questions, which is absolutely fine. That looks like quite a question. If TOK stays away from subject teachers, the traditional approach, would the integration be an abrupt act? Is there any benefit? Again, I think I'll respond to that in my debrief. Okay, all right, guys. I think that's going to be it for now. If you have any questions, then you can send them my way by email. Oh, hang on, we've got a couple of good questions here. How frequently should TOK discussion be integrated in regular classes? Well, as often as it can be, really. I mean, I think you could do it virtually every class. I think in history, you know, this is my sort of big reference point. In history, probably every class had a discussion of some sort that was relevant to TOK. So just as often as you can, I think. Again, I think that's a good question, which I'd quite like to give some more thought on in the debrief. Okay, I think that's it for today. We have another integration webinar next week for Group 4. We have a webinar for parents, which is the first time I've ever done that. I'm quite excited about talking to parents, I hope, which is in November. So if you want to check those out, you can go to the website and look at the webinar page. These are obviously all free. I hope you've got something out of this, but please send me your questions if you want more advice and more tips. Many thanks for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you very much.